Welcome to this lesson on the human use of forests, past and present. This week, we're going to learn first about how forests are made, because we can't talk about the human use of forests without talking about the origin of forests or where they come from in the first place. Then we'll talk about how humans used forests in the past and how we use forests now. So, our learning goals are: I can describe how forests are made. I can analyze historical patterns of the human use of forests. And I can describe how historical patterns of forest use by humans have changed over time. Our language goal is: I can talk about forests using words like pioneer species, disturbance, historical, and patterns of use. Let's dive into it. So, our first section: how are forests made? We will read some information about the four main ways that forests are created, and then I will suggest to you that that will be a good time to go and do the assignment Science 11.2, How are forests made? Do it while the information is all fresh in your mind. How are forests made? Forests can grow from bare, rocky areas because wind and water carry soil into the area and it gets stuck in cracks and holes. Plant seeds are also blown in by the wind and they begin to grow in the soil. The water from rain and rivers and sunlight feeds the seeds. Then the seeds that love the sun grow first and they grow well. And when they get big enough, the seeds of trees and other plants that don't quite like the sun as much will start to grow underneath those sun-loving trees. Over many years of this, a forest grows. Another way that forests are made is that they can grow from pond areas. This is because the water and sunlight help the plants on the edge of the pond grow. We know that plants and trees need and love both water and sunlight. Over time, the plants die and fall into the pond, filling it up and making it shallower. Seeds are blown into the shallow pond by the wind, and then the trees that love water start to grow along the edges of the pond. These trees use up a lot of the water in the pond and the area becomes drier. Then seeds from trees that like dry land start to grow. When the pond dries up completely, the trees that really like wet areas most often die and a dry forest is left. A third way that forests are made is that they can grow from an empty field of grass and flowers. And this is because wind, water, and animals can bring in seeds. The seeds of trees that love the sun will grow in the soil, and they are fed by rainwater and sunlight. These first plants to grow in these areas, we call them pioneer species, and that's because they're the first plants that grow there. They're kind of like pioneers. These species are uniquely suited to surviving in full sun, and they are very important to the eventual creation of forests. If we didn't have pioneer species that loved full sun, we would not have as many forests. And the reason for that is, again, when the trees that love the sun get big enough, that allows the seeds from trees and other plants that like less sun to start to grow underneath them, because those conditions are less sunny, because the bigger pioneer species, the sun-loving species, will block out some of the sun. So the species that don't quite like that full sun will grow much better underneath the canopy of those trees. And again, over many years, a forest grows. The fourth way that we are going to learn about is forests growing from an area that has gone through what we call a forest disturbance, such as a forest fire or deforestation. And deforestation is a word that means humans cutting down all the trees. A forest disturbance is any event that returns a forest to an earlier stage of growth. This could be as small as a few trees blowing down in a storm to complete removal of the entire canopy and the surface organic material, so the soil. So a bad wildfire could reduce the entire canopy and surface organic material. The most significant disturbances are those that are caused by human activity, like deforestation, where almost 100% of the canopy and organic material is removed from an area of land. And that practice is called clear cutting. And it is a very significant forest disturbance that makes it hard for forests to continue regenerating. Now I recommend that you go back to Google Classroom, so pause this video and work on the assignment Science 11.2 while all this information is fresh in your mind. Our next topic is, how do we use forests today? So we will be reflecting on some questions about forest use on the next slide, and then reading through descriptions of how humans use forests and considering how to group them into different categories. So let's take a moment now to reflect on these questions. Why do people spend time in forests? Many people love to go to the mountains and other forested areas, parks, and areas that are full of trees, and spend time there. So why do you think that is? Take some time to think about it. You might want to jot down some of your thoughts as well. Why do people like to spend time in forests? Why are we drawn to forests? The second reflection question that we are going to think about is, what are some things that people can do in forests? So if you are a person who likes to spend time in forests, or if you have spent some time in a forest, what are some of the things you can do there? And if you joined in on the Bowness Park field trip, we did have the opportunity to spend some time in and among the trees. So maybe that will help give you some ideas of some of the things that people like to do when they are in the forest. Our third reflection question is, what are some of the different ways in which people use forests? So think of all the many uses that humans have for forests. And again, might not hurt to jot down some ideas and keep track of them for the next phase of this task. Here are some of the reasons that people use forests today. Let's read through the list and then think about some of the ideas that you generated based on those reflection questions on the last slide. Here are some reasons that people use forests today. As beautiful scenery to look at. As a source of wood for constructing homes. As a source of wood for making sports equipment like hockey sticks or tennis rackets. Musical instruments like guitars and violins and clarinets, and much more. As a source of pulpwood for making paper products. As a good place to go snowshoeing or snowmobiling in the winter. As a good place to go hiking at any time of year. As a place to work as a wildlife officer, tree planter, trail guide, and more. So those are just a few of the reasons that people use forests today. Take some time to think about how you could group these ideas into different categories. Right away, I'm thinking about one of these sections mentioned work and working. So that might be a category. And then some of the other ones mention some activities that we might do, like hiking or snowshoeing or snowmobiling. So that's starting to give me some ideas of how we might group forest use into different categories. Our next topic is, how do you think human use of forests has changed over time? So we're going to read through this information, and then I'll recommend that you stop and do the assignment Science 11.3, Human Impact on Forests. Now, here are some of the ways in which people used forests in the past. So we just talked about the ways that people use forests in the present. And let's look at the past. I really want you to think about ways in which they are different and ways in which they are the same. Here are some reasons that people use forests today. Well, this should say in the past. Read through the list and think about the ideas that you generated on the last slide when we were talking about uses of forests today. So, in the past, people used forests as a beautiful scenery to look at, as a source of wood for fires, as a source of wood for constructing homes or making tools, or making vehicles like carts or buggies, as a source of pulpwood for making paper products. That one is in the past and the present. People used to use forests as a source of ingredients for medicines, as a source of food. And that doesn't mean just using the trees as food, but trees make a great ecosystem for many different creatures and other plants that people in the past used for food through foraging or hunting. And also as a place to work as an animal tracker. Now we're going to think about how we could group all of these ideas into categories. And now we're going to go back to Google Classroom and do the activity Science 11.3, where we will spend time putting some of these different forest uses into different categories. Here's a summary of what we learned today. Humans use forests for many reasons. Human uses of forests form a historical pattern, and human patterns of use of forests have changed over time from the past to the present.